Hello, everybody. It's the movie everybody's been waiting for. The final return of Mel Gibson, the most based man in America. We have Hacksaw Ridge, based on the incredible true story. And it is a true story. I actually, at the end, when they kind of do the historical thing and they show the guys being interviewed and stuff, the true story is actually substantially less believable than the movie. But we'll get into that. So Mel Gibson, after saying a bunch of based stuff and kind of exposing Shlomo, it happened that he was not allowed to make movies anymore, which is a damn shame because Mel Gibson always makes good movies. Even if he doesn't direct them, they're still Mel Gibson movies. Braveheart is awesome. The Patriot is cheesy but awesome. What were some of the other movies he made? I feel like I'm forgetting a really big one. I didn't like Passion of the Christ very much. Oh, what was the other big? Oh, We Were Soldiers. Just Mel Gibson is just awesome in general, and he's just super based. And this is kind of an archetypical Mel Gibson movie. So with that being said, let's just get right into it. So Hacksaw Ridge tells the story of the first conscientious objector to ever win the Medal of Honor. We have Desmond Doss, who's kind of similar to I completely forgot where I was going with this. Desmond Doss, who is very similar to Forrest Gump, is what I was going to say in a lot of ways. I can't tell if he's like mentally slow or something, or if he's just Southern. Okay, I know a lot of Southerners are going to get mad at me for that. I'm just making a little joke, guys. I love you. I love the land of the free and the home of the brave. Not even Southern, just like really, really redneck with no formal education. But the film starts off with his brother and him fighting, and he uses a brick on his brother and almost kills him. And kind of as a result of that, Desmond has a spiritual awakening, and he becomes convinced that murder is the worst thing possible, and he resolves to never touch a weapon or kill anybody for the rest of his life. Later on, you find out that part of it is his father was a survivor of the Great War who saw all of his friends from the same town die, and his father's a violent alcoholic who almost kills his mother with a pistol. And Desmond manages to stop him. However, it reinforces his belief that violence is evil, and he once again affirms that he won't ever commit violence in his life. So later, we cut to a couple years later where he's very actively involved in his church. Now, he is a Seventh-day Adventist, which I don't know a ton about. I think Seventh-day Adventist would be considered Christian. It's difficult when you get into a lot of these extremely low church Protestant groups, because I would describe Christians as people who accept the Council of Nicaea or accept the Nicene Creed and are baptized. I don't know if they do or not. I did look it up, but it's most of them don't even really know what it is, and that's kind of the difficulty with a lot of very low church Protestant groups, because you have guys like Lutherans who can like recite the Nicene Creed and agree with it 100%. Then you have some people that think like the Bible, the King James Bible, just descended from heaven. But anyways, he saves a young man's life who was hit by a car, and he goes to the hospital, and there's an absolutely gorgeous nurse played by Teresa Palmer, who just looks amazing in every movie she's in. She was in Lights Out earlier this year, and she looked gorgeous in it. She's just kind of a tall blonde with, I guess, kind of golden hair, kind of reddish blonde hair. Very pretty, though. So, being a healthy young man, Desmond immediately falls in love with her, and he awkwardly flirts with her. He succeeds in going out with her just because he's so charming. And they get together, and she becomes his girl, and this is when we start to get into the kind of why this is a fantasy movie that's more fantastical than Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange had its own version of alternate dimensions, but this film has an even more bizarre alternate dimension. This is the 1940s. Everybody's white. Like, everybody's, like, dressed properly. No one has tattoos. No one has weird piercings. I don't think anyone was, like, morbidly obese. The women, like, smile. They're, like, dressed like women. They, like, care about their physical appearance, and they aren't thoughts. It's really, really surreal. It's a lot more surreal than, like, any of the shit that happens in Doctor Strange. And when I was watching this movie, and I was watching him, like, his innocent flirting with the girl, and when he decides to go off to war, she's like, "You're gonna marry me before you go off to war." And I'm like, wow, that would never happen today. I think it's implied they don't even have premarital sex. And just that wouldn't happen today. People having kind of like a wholesome, normal relationship is seen as evil by society. And I wonder who's behind that. But anyways, so he's engaged to her. His brother goes off to war, and a bunch of other people from his town go off to war, and he believes he has to serve his country, but he doesn't believe in violence. So he volunteers for the army on the condition that he can be a medic. He says, "I won't carry a gun. I'll go in and I'll save people, but I won't lift a rifle." So then we kind of have the series where he's in boot camp. He's being trained, and his entire regiment hates him. The officers hate him. The sergeant, played by Vince Vaughn, who does an excellent job in this movie. Vince Vaughn's actually a pretty good actor. He just is often in really bad movies, or just in like lame comedy movies. But he does a really good job as the sergeant in this film. So he basically kind of tries to get them to just treat him like shit until he leaves. And I mean, while there's a certain cruelty to it, I think the movie's pretty fair on it. The movie treats the people as having issues with him as being legitimate, largely. The fear being that if they're in combat and he's not willing to shoot, there could be like some Japanese guys sneaking up behind them and he won't be able to do anything about it. Which I think is reasonable. And some people see him as a coward, and other people see him as being just misled. There's a number of during this period, most people are Christians. So like the colonel's like, I believe in this book as much as you do, but I believe that we have a religious duty to defend our country and defend our people. And I know a lot of people who watch my videos will go, "Oh no, the Allies were the real evil." I don't. It's not really relevant. It's a moral quandary. So he's like, we're fighting evil in this war, and I think God has given us a duty to fight evil. And the guy goes, "No, God has told us to be pacifists no matter what." And I actually really agree with the former, and I kind of disliked him for the first half of the movie. Just because I think that's why I actually stopped being Christian for a long time. Was because I felt the pacifist groups, because I was kind of partially raised like extremely liberal Mennonite, and I felt it just wasn't strong enough in its, I guess, kind of the emphasis on the religion to fight evil. And I guess that's just kind of the way I am. Love is all well and good, but the world's full of well, the night is dark and full of terrors. There's people like ISIS, there's rapists, there's drug dealers, there's child molesters, there's thieves, there's all kinds of horrible people in the world. And I do believe that God has given us a duty to kill them, or to just deal with them. And so I really disagreed with his view that you can't have violence. And the guy tries to talk to me. He's like, "What if the guy's like comes in and he's gonna rape your wife?" And he's like, "I don't know." He's like, "Well, what should we do?" And he's like, "I don't know." So it's difficult. Kind of the view I often take with regards to extremely principled positions like this, like being fed to lions or whatever, is men should be brave with their own lives, but not brave with the lives of others, if that makes sense. So his willingness to die for his religious beliefs is very laudable, but I don't think he can really impose that on anyone else, and I think he takes this perspective or impose it on his country. His country has to fight to defend itself and to defend the people within it. The leadership has to do that. It's their moral duty, regardless of their personal feelings towards violence. And this is kind of how I feel with the migrant crisis. If people want to like help them, then that's kind of a personal thing. If they want to take the perspective, oh, it's better for morally, I think it's better for this person to come in than whatever the long-term consequences are. The issue is there's a difference between sacrificing yourself and sacrificing your society. There's a difference between martyring yourself and telling the rest of your society that and forcing it to martyr itself. So I guess that's kind of the way around it. Because in life there's often competing goods, and in life there's often multiple laudable paths towards things. So he goes through this big crisis. He goes through just everyone treating him like shit. And eventually his father comes in and manages to talk to a general who he knew from World War One. And the general gives him the necessary deferment to go to war without carrying a weapon. Because he was originally getting court-martialed because they were desperately trying to get him out of the army because he refused to use a rifle for target practice. So they wind up finally getting shipped off to war, and they go to Iwo Jima. So this is where Hacksaw Ridge comes in. So Hacksaw Ridge is a literal cliff, and there's kind of like this giant rope ladder that they have to climb up to get onto the ridge. So the previous day, a battalion or whatever got wiped out, and only a couple came back alive. So they're ordered to assault up this giant rope ladder and attack the Japanese position. So we get to see some battleships, which is always cool because I love battleships. So the battleships come in and they fire just round after round. And you can see how absolutely devastating battleship fire is. I mean, they're 16, 17-inch shells, and unlike rockets, they carry a lot of them. So they can do it for hours on end. I remember during D-Day, the Germans stated they were more afraid of the battleships than the entire Allied Air Corps. And that was kind of the purpose, even after battleships weren't very useful for sea combat with carriers. They were amazing when it came to shore bombardment, because basically they're massive artillery cannons that can move. They're much bigger than most forms of land artillery. I mean, if you put into perspective, like the biggest cannons, plus they're long-barreled. Unfortunately, though, and this is kind of, we're getting into the military part of the movie where the movie kind of completely changes. Mel Gibson is a master of making realistic war scenes. He understands how guns work, he understands how artillery works, how infantry tactics work. This is one of the most realistic movies I've ever seen from kind of a war perspective. It's almost worth seeing this movie because of how accurately it kind of captures the pluses and minuses of various battlefield tactics and that kind of thing. Which is always something that fascinates me. So, the thing about artillery is not meant to kill small groups of people. The purpose of artillery is A, to suppress your enemy. That is, if artillery shells are flying everywhere, you're not going to be able to move. Your enemy's going to be hiding in holes, unable to move around. So it makes it impossible for them to assault or to retreat. It's also to just do general damage. The thing is, though, earth is a very effective way of stopping explosions, which is why foxholes work so well. If you're in a foxhole, like you dig a hole and you hide in it, unless an artillery shell basically lands right in your hole, which is very unlikely, you're pretty safe from artillery. That's also why they introduced helmets. Helmets aren't really made to stop bullets. They will often deflect bullets, but what helmets do is they block shrapnel. When a shell explodes, the casing flies out and there's these big pieces of metal. However, they're not really aerodynamic, so they'll bounce off a helmet. There's also stuff like wood splinters, rocks. Maybe it hits something and it explodes. So between your helmet and your hole, you're pretty good. Also, if you kind of have an underground, like you dig underground, it's extremely difficult to destroy that with shelling. Like I said, Earth is a very good absorber of shock. So while the battleships probably kill a lot of people, they don't destroy the Japanese. So the army climbs up the ridge and they attack the Japanese, and we're treated to one of the best battle scenes I've ever seen in a movie. By this point in the war, the Americans had learned the importance of automatic weaponry. And since this is a close range battle, they use a mixture of grease guns, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles, in addition to M1 Garands. The Americans have always had in war a firepower focus. There's different focuses in war. There's kind of a maneuver focus, which is like what the Germans used. Kind of spearhead, outmaneuver, and destroy your enemies that way. The Russians use a human wave tactics and just overwhelming numbers and volumes of firepower. What the Americans tend towards is kind of a more technological firepower focus. From World War II on, they always have had the best radios. This is partially just because America has the biggest electronics industry. So, like, every squad has their own radio. There's an extremely advanced fire control with artillery. Virtually every squad in the American Army from that point on could call in artillery strikes, and they'd be quite accurate. So they could be like, okay, we need an artillery strike at this coordinates, and they'd bombard the position in front of them. And this is immensely useful if you're being attacked. Like, say you're maybe like 20 guys, and then you spot like 100 guys, and they're starting to head towards you. Being able to call in an artillery strike on them and have it come in rapidly was an immense advantage. So they had that, but just in general, because America has so much industrial capacity, they could, at least by the end of the war, start outfitting everyone, much like the Russians could, with automatic weapons. So in close range combat, the Japanese are still using their bolt actions. There's nothing wrong with a bolt action rifle. I actually really like the Kar 98. It's probably my favorite rifle of all time. But they don't have a great deal of firepower. The real reason you have automatic weapons is twofold. The first one is they are very effective at close range. You can kill multiple people if you're very close to them. The second is they're good for suppressing fire. The purpose of most bullets shot in a war isn't actually to hit anything, it's to suppress your opponents. That is, if you're firing bursts of a machine gun at an enemy position, people aren't going to be able to stick their heads out. If they stick their heads up, they might be hit by a stray bullet even if the person's not aiming at anything in particular. It's very hard to poke your head up and aim and fire when there's a machine gun that's firing bursts at you. And that's kind of the purpose. You have automatic weapons, so you just fire bursts from a large magazine at the enemy position, and then the rest of your guys can move up. And that's kind of the advantage of them. Also, just if you're like 20 feet out, it's pretty hard to miss with an automatic weapon. So you could just kind of burst fire and take people down. It's bolt action rifles take a lot more time to aim. They have much better range and accuracy. But what the Germans would do was they would have machine gun based squad tactics. So there'd be 2 machine gunners and a couple dozen riflemen with bolt actions, and the machine guns would provide the firepower. And the purpose of the bolt actions would to be provide like marksmanship support, like shoot people who are trying to get the machine gunner, and that actually worked. The Japanese, though, contrary to what people might think, didn't have particularly good tactics. The Japanese were not particularly good strategic or tactical fighters. A lot of the times they would massively overextend themselves. They had completely delusional ideas of their capacities. And once you actually got into the real battles of the war, the Americans generally destroyed them. The reason that the battles went on as long as they did is because Japanese are just crazy when it comes to war. And later in this battle, what happens is the Japanese start pretending to surrender, and then they pull out grenades and blow themselves up along with the Americans. And that's kind of the thing they would do. The Japanese were just horrific people during the war. Like, you see them between battles, just walking around killing everybody, sometimes with swords, slaughtering the wounded. Specifically, they refer to at one point, they will deliberately shoot medics first. Generally speaking, there's like some rules of war. Like you don't shoot people who are getting water, you don't shoot medics. And there's a certain degree of honor where both sides agree to not do things that will just completely screw over the others that won't really be decisive. Like, generally speaking, if someone's shot, they're out of the war. Whether a medic saves their life or not, they're out of the war. Shooting a medic is just an evil thing to do. It doesn't really serve a strategic purpose other than terror. So after the Japanese soldiers start grenading themselves, the Americans just start shooting anyone who surrenders, which I agree with. I mean, I'm all for taking prisoners, but if the guys are going to start blowing themselves up, then you got to do it. And I think during the invasion of Okinawa, where this is the Japanese women were like putting bombs on themselves and like throwing themselves, like doing suicide bombings. The Japanese were utterly ruthless during World War II. So, anyways, they basically are winning against the Japanese, but a massive bonsai charge drives them back off the top of the ridge. And they're just scrambling to get out of the way because they're just getting utterly devastated. So everybody gets forced off of the ridge except for Desmond. And what Desmond does is he stays behind because he believes that God has appointed him with a mission to save the people. And he's like crying, he's like, God, give me a sign. And then he hears someone screaming, yelling for help. So he spends the next like 20 hours finding men on the battlefield, dragging them back, and lowering them down the cliff with ropes. And so he does this when battleships are firing. There's like battleships firing, and he's ducking in and out of the shells and pulling more and more men back. He winds up saving all the squad members that previously called him a coward. And throughout the night, just more and more people are brought down from the cliff. Overall, it doesn't show it in the movie because it would have been too unbelievable and would have taken too long. He pulled 75 men down from the cliff, and most of them survived. They reference the fact that he took a couple Japs down, but the Japs didn't make it. Meaning the Americans probably shot them when they came down, but you can't really blame them, given how fucking brutal the Japanese had been. So yeah, so he goes and he manages to save the majority of his squad, and all the previous people from his squad acknowledge him. Later in the movie, his captain calls him the bravest man he ever met. Now, I should note that this isn't like, the movie doesn't portray it like, his squad members are all terrible people, they're all cowards, he's the only brave one. It's more saying that he was brave in a different way and they just couldn't see it. I mean, to go up on on Okinawa, to climb up a sheer cliff and fight wave after wave of Japanese soldiers, and then to go back up and fight them again and to not break and run, requires a man of immense bravery, whether they're Desmond or not. So the movie in no way kind of attacks his fellow squad members. The movie also, I don't think, ultimately views them as bad for trying to make him leave the army. I think there was a combination of frustration towards his position, genuine, in my view, kind of legitimate fear of what would happen if they got into combat and there was a situation where he needed to use a weapon and he was unwilling to do so, and just kind of some stuff like that. But no, I don't think it really looks down upon them. And yeah, so it kind of says people serve in different ways. So ultimately, Desmond succeeds in getting as many as he can, and the last one he brings down is Sarge. And this is the only time in the movie that he picks up a gun. He picks up a gun and uses it in combination with a tarp to make a sled for Sarge. And there's an awesome scene where he pulls Vince Vaughn along, and Vince Vaughn has a submachine gun, and he just guns a bunch of Japs down. And that was pretty awesome. So then they reach the edge, and they tie themselves up and basically jump off. And a bunch of Japs come over the top, and they're shooting down, but the company shoots back at them. And the core, or I guess all the guys, just when they see him come down, he's become like a religious figure. They all like try to touch him, just to make sure that he's real. All the men just are in complete awe of him. and they have to go back up and fight again the next day. And it's the Sabbath, which is Saturday for Seventh day Adventists. But his commander goes, "Look, those men won't go back up without you. Not all of them believe the way you do, but they believe in how much you believe, and they think that you're a miracle sent to us by God. So they won't go back up there unless you're with them." So then the next scene is all the men are just staying there, like with their standing there with their helmets off, and a colonel calls in. He's like, "Why haven't you moved yet?" And they're like, "We're waiting for Private Desmond to finish praying for us." And the guy's like, "Who the hell's Private Desmond?" And then they don't answer. So he goes back up with them, and they just go in and just kick the ass of the remaining Japanese and just drive them back. And then a bunch of Japanese surrender, but reality it's just so they can get close, and then they all throw grenades at the Americans. And Desmond slaps one away, and he kicks one away, but he gets badly injured in the explosion of the grenades. However, he survives and makes it out. He would go on to win the Medal of Honor and be one of the most famous and celebrated soldiers in American history. He would marry the woman he left behind, and they had a child together. He would also just go on to be a true American hero who stayed loyal and married to his wife till her death, and was loyal to his faith for the rest of his life. Hacksaw Ridge is a good movie for a lot of ways. It shows the incredible things people can do with religion. Unlike a lot of movies where there's just some kind of generic spirituality, Desmond has a very strong belief in Jesus Christ specifically. The Bible's frequently quoted through the movie. It's an explicitly Christian movie. It's not one of those spiritual but not religious movies. No, it's very strongly a distinctly Christian film. So it's also one of the most accurate war movies I've ever seen. Certainly one of the most gory, but it really shows just the horrors of war. And also, I just like it for the guns and battlefield tactics. So I would highly recommend seeing this movie. Mel's back. Thank God Mel's back. I love Mel Gibson. I hope he keeps making movies. Based Mel. Go see the movie, guys. This is Argent. I'll talk to you later.